welcome to Combat Thoughts. I'm Robbie.
I'm Lee.
And I'm Alex.
We're going to take a deeper look at the culture and philosophy behind martial arts. Let's start way at the beginning, Ian. Don't need to do too much of your elaborate martial arts career, but probably best to start off with a bit of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, I think the first UFC event that I ever seen was UFC 38.5, and that was in Royal Albert Hall in the UK. It was, I think it was an event that was headlined by Tito Ortiz and Elvis Sinasek. And my buddy gave me a VHS tape of it, and, you know, I had my kind of passion for combat sports maybe kind of started off through boxing and watching like old boxing fights back in the day. Maybe I remember watching old boxing fights with my dad, and we used to watch like Prince Nassim Hamed come up and all along Chris Eubank. Of course, we had Steve Collins, a good Irish boxer back then. So I loved boxing, and I just loved what two guys going in against one another, and it's just the ultimate problem solving, isn't it? When you're talking about boxing, it's just a specific set of skills. But when I first seen MMA, I was like, holy shit, what is going on here? I mean, it was just had
problem solving with dire physical consequences.
Exactly. There's a lot more elements that were involved, and you know, I watched that first VHS, and yeah, it was bloody. I think it was, I want to say it was Tito Ortiz and Elvis Sinasek, and I remember that Sinasek had always had this like bright colored hair, but by the end of the fight, that color of his hair was gone red because it was covered in blood. But I remember, like, I didn't see too much, so I kind of keeping one eye on mixed martial arts, and then I guess the first UFC I would have seen after that would have been, and what really got me hooked on the sport would have been Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz, the first fight, and that was UFC 46, I believe. And it was just the story going into that, former training partners and former friends, and now they're fighting for the title. I mean, it just got me hooked instantly. And then the whole finish of that fight with the barrage of punches that Chuck Liddell, it made me, number one, a Chuck Liddell fan, and number two, a mixed martial arts fan. And like, I watched that fight, and I've said it time and time again, I watched that fight, and I knew after watching that fight that I was going to be watching MMA forever, and I was going to be a fan forever. I just knew it, and I still say that to this day. And yeah, I got more passionate about the sport, followed it a lot longer, all along the couple of years and stuff like that. And then I have a couple of cousins and relations that are in kind of combat sports in Muay Thai and stuff. So I actually made the decision one time just to kind of make a go and to start training as a fighter. And, you know, I was at a time in my life where I wasn't really working that much, and I just decided to make the jump into maybe just go and start training.
So how long were you interested in MMA before?
I was watching. I say I was watching it solid from the early 2000s, right on up until maybe 2007 and 2008. That's when I kind of started jumping into kind of do a bit of training and stuff like that. Myself and my cousin, Mick Brennan, who also competed, we kind of started that together, and he's running a gym over in Kilkenny back home right now. So they're doing really well, but we decided to go in and do that together. And for me, I kind of had, in comparison for me and him at the start, when I started training, I guess, like, you know, you have to learn the intricacies of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and striking. Like, I got into mixed martial arts without having really any past experience of fighting. I didn't know if I could throw a punch. I didn't know if I could take a punch. You know, I found out all those questions sometimes the hard way, you know. So, I mean, those are all questions that you don't know. And I guess at that time for me, I kind of wanted to ask myself those questions and kind of integrate into the sport. And it gave me by choosing to go down and start training, it kind of gave me a different look if I was watching a fight, or You know, it was crazy. And my experience in fighting, I think I competed, you know, at an amateur level. I started training basically full time, 6 days a week, twice a day. Just went in ahead for it. I had no job at the time. I was like, let's just make a go for it. 2 days a week, 6 days a week, we were training like professionals. And, you know, about 6 to 8 months later, I was fighting in my first amateur fight. So, I mean, I kind of picked it up quickly, and kind of I guess the experience I had from watching old UFCs, and what the UFC and what, in particular, what Joe Rogan did so well back in the day. And if you go back and watch old UFCs, is that his ability to be able to simplify and break down the art of jiu-jitsu was huge. You know, anybody can watch somebody throw a punch or throw a kick, and yes, there's intricacies and techniques you need to do there, but like anybody who starts watching mixed martial arts, once the fight hits the ground, you're kind of like, what the fuck is going on here? Like, you don't know what's going on. So luckily for me, when I went in and started training, and like listening to Joe Rogan and having all those like explanations and everything that he did was hugely helpful to me. Whereas that if somebody asked me to put somebody in a triangle, I would be able to put them in a triangle, but what I would have to have had to learn was the stages before you get somebody into that triangle. But at least I knew what the move was, and a lot of other moves was, and I wasn't kind of going into it blind. So that kind of helped me out tremendously. But like, unfortunately for me, back in the day, Irish MMA wasn't where it is right now. You know, it still isn't where it should be, really. You know, they're still fighting really hard to get the sport regulated and recognised in Ireland right now. But way back in the day, it used to be called the Wild West days. And I mean, that's what it was. It was...
Because it's funny you said you started at an MMA gym, because when I did Muay Thai kind of early 2000s, our like big trips were going fight in an island, and we'd take a team over and we'd go and fight in an island. And like the Irish Muay Thai scene was like legit. Like there was shit hot going on, and it was like,
yeah, I went to like, and it was big at the time. I was being tried. They were trying to get me to go into maybe some kickboxing fights. I went to my first gym, and only gym I really spent time with was Top Pro in Kilkenny, which at the time was half kind of kickboxing, half mixed martial arts. But me, I went in there and trained in everything. Like, I didn't go in there and start at kickboxing or boxing or jiu-jitsu. I went in and I did my jiu-jitsu classes, I did my boxing classes, and I did my Muay Thai classes and my wrestling classes and your judo classes. And I guess like that, and we're kind of seeing that more and more in the sport now, is that maybe, you know, I didn't stay fighting. It just didn't happen. It was just, I was probably in the right place at the wrong time for me personally. I fought a lot of guys that were much, much bigger than me. So you're kind of I was weighing in at a flyweight, maybe 56 kgs. I was fighting at 61 kgs, and I was fighting a guy who was probably cutting down from 68, 69 kgs to 61, who would maybe be 68, 69, 70 kgs by the time I got in there. And I wasn't cutting anyway. I mean, that was when I got into shape, my natural weight was the natural 125 or so. I mean, I was fighting against bigger guys all the time, which is tough in its own right. So, I mean, I won some fights and I lost some fights, and I took a good beating in my last fight. And, you know, the head trauma and stuff like that kind of played effect on me in a little bit with my mental health and stuff, whereas like, you know, I was getting a little bit down and the head trauma wasn't really helping. So I kind of took a step away from it then at that stage, and kind of...
Why did you initially make that decision, not with cutting weight and stuff? What was it that made you go in just like, I'm just going to fight as it is? Because I hear this a lot from amateur guys who are like, I was pretty good, but I made this stupid choice, and it's always the same stupid choice, and it's always not cutting weight, and it always means people get battered.
I had no choice at that time. I mean, we were talking about 2008 in Ireland, and like when I was fighting on shows, the posters weren't mixed martial arts event. The posters were saying extreme cage fighting at the time. Yeah. So we were at that stage, and for me, I was training twice a week. I didn't obviously have a nutritionist or anything like that, but like I was eating steak 3 or 4 times a week trying to keep that weight on. But it's just you're training hard. Like I didn't cut any weight and I was at like 125, but there was no 125-pound fighters in Ireland at that time. There was like
You
maybe
just had to
Neil
get what you
Seary.
could. It's kind
Yeah,
of
there was like Neil Seary was, and I wasn't going to be going in after 6 months training and looking to be fighting someone like Neil Seary, who was like a legend at the time and went on to be very successful in the UFC. So it was like my hands were tied a little bit. I wanted to fight and I wanted to compete, but it was a double-edged sword because I had to go in against those bigger guys where, yeah, they might not be as skillful or as well-rounded as you, but they're stronger. They might hit harder. And, you know, you're going in against somebody that's heavier than you. You're already at a disadvantage. And, you know, I kind of had to take a step back and reassess things. And I won't, like for me, I think one of the things that kind of hindered me in some ways was that, you know, I had an ability and I had a good outreach of people who wanted to come and see me fight. So I would have been selling a lot of tickets. So, like, I mean, I went from fighting amateur fights to co-headlining and headlining cards in a very short period of time there. So, I mean, being a ticket seller kind of can be a hindrance to you because maybe they were setting up fights for me that just because they know that the tickets were going to be sold, and I had loads of fights pull out. Like, I mean, you're dealing with about 5 or 6 fight pullouts before you actually get finally opponent. That's what you're dealing with back in the day. There's no tape to study any of these guys. And for me, it was like, while I loved doing it and stuff like that, I just had to come to a decision at that time. And my decision was that I took a step away from it, see how things worked out. And I just decided that I wasn't going to go back in and compete. I do have that itch. I always will have that itch. I'll still go in there and train and compete. And I mean, for me, mixed martial arts changed my life. Like, you know what I mean? I went in there as a young man, not knowing anything about myself or if I could fight or anything like that. And it's not even about like giving yourself that self-confidence because you know you can fight. It's more so like you really find out the answers to your questions about yourself in the gym, like how deep you can dig, and just the camaraderie and everything involved in the gym. It just helps you build, like it builds your confidence. And that's what I did mainly for me, you know, and it helped me tremendously. And I took a step away from it, and I still maintain the training, and I still do try and train as much as I can, but I never will compete again. But I felt that I felt I was kind of in this kind of a, not, what's the correct word? Like, I was kind of in purgatory as such, whereas that I love the fighting and I love MMA, and me getting into MMA was like, at the time people were calling it cage fighting, when we were trying to like sell the sport as mixed martial arts and as a sport at the time. So I wanted to be a representative for Irish MMA in particular, and represent it in a good fashion and show that it's not this brutal, it is brutal sport, but like, you know, the way people were talking about like human cockfight and all that kind of stuff. And like, I just wanted to be a representative and show that, you know, it's a good thing. It can do good things for fighters and for people who go in there and train. You, like, you don't even have to go in and compete. Even the practice of going in there and training helps somebody out tremendously with knowing how to defend yourself and confidence and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, after I stopped fighting, I was kind of like, I still wanted to kind of give back to the sport of MMA because it's given me so much pleasure, and like, I think about it and I'm passionate about it all the time. And I wanted to give back, but I didn't know how I could do that. And my confidence levels before going into maybe covering the sport of MMA, I could only describe it as I kind of got out of my own way, because for years and years and years, I gave myself loads of excuses not to go in and to make the jump over to start covering the sport covering the sport like on a regular basis. And I mean, I finally made that decision 2 years ago, and I'm very happy that I did. I mean, because now I'm getting the exact same feelings that I got when I went in to fight, but I'm not taking any shots to the head anymore. And it's so much better. I mean, I can think a lot straighter, and you know, it's a tough business, man. Like going in there, and you guys, you guys have trained and you compete and stuff like that. Like it's not fucking easy to do. I mean, on top of everything else, you're going in there and you're taking head trauma on a daily basis, and I would imagine that I've suffered a couple of concussions down along the line, and when taking shots, I had my first fight. I got my jaw broken in the second round.
Wow.
I mean, yeah, that was it. My very first fight. I mean, I got cracked with a nice punch in the second round, and just remember seeing this big flash of white light and got this ringing in my ears, and I was like, oh shit, this guy's after knocking out one of my teeth or something like that. So I didn't feel any pain, so I was like, yeah, let's stay going. And I ended up staying going and ended up winning that fight. But it was a big sacrifice that I had to take. That happened in February 2010, and I went and got my jaw fixed. Went and started training again, and I was back in the cage that later on that September on the same year, fighting again.
Jeez.
So I mean, that was the sacrifice. Those are the sacrifices that a lot of guys make that you never hear about. And that was only like a very low amateur semi-pro level in Ireland at the time. So I mean, I had that injury. I had a couple of other injuries, as you do as you're competing. So I mean, I got to a stage where I didn't think for me the juice was worth the squeeze when it came to fighting. If it was in the same position right now, look, there's a bunch of fighters there that would have been at my weight, so maybe it would have worked out different. But I don't have any regrets at all about it. I think that I probably stepped out at the right time for myself, definitely for my mental health as well. I mean, when you are dealing, go ahead, yeah.
It's a hard business to be in, like.
Yeah.
The number of guys a lot of guys have problems later on that they don't want to talk about because there's this whole machismo image that goes along with being a cage fighter, and a lot of them don't talk about it until like 20 years later, and then they're like, I've had a shit time for the whole time. Mm-hmm. I always think about Spencer Fisher. I'm sure you've heard about the sort of state that he's in.
Yeah. The first big one the first big one that came out, I think, a couple of years back was Gary Goodridge was the first MMA fighter that I seen coming out and talking about it. And it does exist. Like, I mean, I think that, and I have other issues that I deal with. Like, I still have issues with my jaw. I still have other niggling injuries, and I've only stepped into the sport for a brief period of time and stepped back out of it again. And I can only imagine what somebody who will put their bodies through 20 or 30 years of it. Like, I mean,
but that's you're going to be dealing. You pay for it before you become a celebrity in the UFC, before you make it big. You have to pay your dues. And there's a lot of people who never made it to any degree of kind of professional, who've paid a big price, your jaw, your concussions. I remember thinking back to when I trained boxing as a kid. I used to come home with concussions most weeks. And like now I speak to my mum about it, and she was like, yeah, it's quite weird. And it's like, there's people living through this stuff where accidentally they subject themselves to a lot of this trauma. And it does have a big impact on your life.
There's a lot more education around CTE and stuff like that now, which is good as well. And I think that people have kind of changed up their sparring methods, whereas that, like, I mean, some of the hardest and heaviest fights that I was ever in was in the gym. Like, I mean, it was hell for leather in there at times, you know what I mean? There's no referee there's no regulations. It's like, kind of, you hit me as hard as you want to get hit. And if someone hits you hard, you're going to hit hard back. And it's not the right way to do things, but that's just the way it was back then. And I mean, like, at the time, you're kind of, I think back on a lot of things right now and how that affected me. But at the time, I was completely oblivious to that, because you're like a robot. You're just going in there every day and drilling and drilling and drilling. It's crazy.
I saw some people commenting on this about insurance and getting injured. And I saw it on the Ju-Jitsu thread on Reddit, and people were talking about how in the UK, if I get injured, it's not really a problem. I mean, it's obviously it's a problem, but it's not going to cripple me financially. I'm fine. I'll just go to the hospital and get fixed. And someone did make a comment that it's amazing that there are any US MMA fighters because they're not making shit money. They're not making fucking anything.
No.
I always wonder the sort of state they get in. It's a strange thing with MMA fighters, the sort of risk analysis that they'll go through. People just don't seem to consider the risks that happen later on. It's that whole thing about you're in there just like a robot. You're just like, this is what I've got to do.
Mm-hmm.
There just doesn't seem to be any consideration of what's going to happen.
No, not at all. It's not talked about enough. As like, yeah, you'll go and you'll do your fight and you'll get your medical check after the fight. But what's it like 4 weeks down after that fight, or 5 weeks after that fight, or you know what I mean? I'm sure that the majority and a lot of promotions have gotten better in wanting like safer MMA and the requirement of brain scans and stuff like that. So I mean, it has come on leaps and bounds. Like I mean, my medical check was before I fought back in the day in Ireland. My medical check was into a room with a doctor, shine a light into two of your eyes, just kind of give you a little bit of a brief pat down. Check your blood pressure. Yeah, check your blood pressure. How are you feeling? How are you feeling today? Good. Are you ready to fight? Yes. Okay, on you go. And that was it.
Oh, I feel honoured then, because the last fight I did must have been 2011, 10. The last fight I did, and they checked my blood pressure, and I thought they was taking big steps forward because at least they was checking blood pressures now.
yeah.
It's not got any better. I did my last fight 2 years ago, and blood pressure, asked me if being concussed, said how are you feeling. I don't even remember them shining a light in my eyes. They just told me to crack on. Shining a light in my eyes was the only thing they did afterwards. I was like,
it's mental.
You were saying about like the injuries and stuff and taking fights and like what's going on. You hear of UFC fighters now taking fights so that they can claim back their injuries after the fight and get the UFC to pay for the medical bills.
Yeah. I've heard that on a couple of occasions. Fighters going into fights injured, and yeah, basically, there's a difference between if you get hurt in camp or if you get, I believe, in the UFC, if you get hurt during a fight, that the UFC will cover all those costs. Which I think if you're a UFC employee, personally, I think that you should be looked after inside and outside of camps. Once you're an employee,
independent contractors who all have to wear the same uniform and can't work for anyone else.
That's it. Yeah, rigorous rules. But yeah, like I mean, you see somebody in the UFC and you see them getting their hands raised. It's like they've had to go through hell and back to get to that position. You know what I mean? All we've seen on that road is them competing in the fights that they've probably won to get there and their end results. But you don't see what's happening behind the scenes. You don't see the injuries. You don't see the head trauma. You don't see the everyday to day stuff that happens in life. You know what I mean? Fighters are a different breed of human being. And I mean, my respect for anybody who steps in there is absolutely huge. And it's part of the reason why I want to kind of cover the sport of MMA right now as well, is to be able to give these fighters the platform to share their stories, to let everybody know that it's just not all about what you see in there for the 15 minutes or the 25 minutes of a fight. I get some great pleasure out of doing that, and like I mean, it gives me a good sense of meaning every day, knowing I can go up and talk to you guys about MMA and talk to fighters about MMA. I just fucking love doing it, guys, and that's just about it. And
I think that's the most important role of MMA media. I think media as a whole in sports has gone very kind of selling headlines and things like that. But I actually think fundamentally the role of the media in sports, and I think in MMA it's a really good one because there's a lot of interesting people, is telling the story of the people. If you can tell that story really well, as a member of the media, you're doing a brilliant job, because we have a lot of weird and wonderful people in MMA.
Oh yeah, there's some fantastic people out there. There really is. There's some great people out there, and there's also some bad people out there too, if we're being real. But like, that's it. I mean, there's this thing and this narrative that has been created maybe by the UFC and by Dana White, that the media is this bad thing for the sport and everything like that, and it's just pure nonsense, to be honest. Like, I mean, anyone who's involved wants to be involved because they love the sport and because they're passionate for the sport. Like, I mean, the majority of the people that I've been talking to all share that passion and all want the same thing as well. Is that, like, our media are put there for the fighters, and we're there to help the fighters tell their story, like you said, Lee. I mean, it's not even about us helping. Yeah, we just have to ask the right questions. It's something that I'm learning to do right now. Like, I'm only covering the sport properly for the last 2 years. I'm still learning about what I should be doing and things that I can improve on as well. So, well, I mean, the guts of it and the basis around MMA media is the same for everybody. It's like, you want to give some people and you want to give fighters the platform. And especially for me, as an Irish man, I get some great pride and pleasure in being able to give a platform to young Irish fighters on the upcome. And, you know, it's something that wasn't always there. And in Ireland, and for working with Severe MMA, and the reason why I would want to work with Severe MMA, and I'm very happy working with Severe MMA, is because they're a part of Irish MMA folklore and a part of Irish MMA history. They've been there, you know. Graham and Andrew were doing the thing for they're coming up on 10 years now as Severe MMA. So they always have been the pioneers in MMA media in Ireland, and always will be in Ireland as well. And, you know, Graham did some fantastic work along with Andrew and Sean and Andy, and I've joined in now with them over the last couple of years. And, like, there's no place else that I would rather be than Severe MMA covering the sport. I mean, we don't do any clickbait. We don't. If Conor McGregor goes down and takes a piss, we don't report on that. I mean, we report on news and interviews and the right stuff. We're not into any clickbait articles, and we want to check our sources. And, you know, this is all stuff that I'm learning and as we go along. And I've had some great help from Graham and from Sean Sheehan as well along the way, and giving me some great guidance and advice. And, you know, those guys, Graham has been covering the sport for 15 years. Sean is nearly covering the sport for 10 years. So, I mean, they're great people to have behind me to give me the advice and to give me the guidance. And I'm very grateful to be, I think things in my world are moving a lot quicker than I thought they would be, to be honest.
I think that's the thing as well about longevity is, like, doing MMA media for 10, 15 years, you kind of can't. There's a big thing in the moment about kind of headlines and getting people in and clickbait. It only lasts so long. Substance will last the length of time. And I think getting that from, like, what you're doing and what you're learning is kind of more important. Everybody can do a bit of clickbait.
Yeah, and, like, I mean, what I wanted to do was, and when I approached Severe MMA, was I wanted to cover the sport in the right way, and I wanted to do it the right way. I wanted to write, and I wanted to improve my writing. Like, when I first started writing for Severe MMA, it was god awful, but, like, you had to start somewhere. I mean, it was a daunting experience for me, like, you know, wondering if you're good enough, or wondering if people want to listen to what you want to say or anything like that. But those are the thoughts that kind of stopped me from getting in a lot sooner to cover the sport. So I'm not doing it for anybody else right now. I'm doing it for myself. I'm doing it for myself, and it gives me a good meaning to wake up every day and knowing that I have this passion that I can work on and I can share with other people, and I can give fighters a spotlight. I mean, that's what I'm doing it for. And I get some great pleasure if I put out an article, or if I put out a preview or something like that, or coming on and doing a podcast. I mean, it makes me feel better, and it makes me in a better humor. It kind of, I have this outlet now. I felt that I had this passion for MMA for years and years, and I kind of had a bit of an outlet for it when I went and started fighting. But then that stopped, and then I was kind of a couple of years in between where I had this passion, like, and I was watching every event, but I was doing nothing with the passion. But now I have this outlet and I have a platform and I can share it. And it just, I feel very blessed to being given the opportunities. And I'm very grateful to be for the opportunity to come on and speak with you guys. And, you know, it's really a good thing. And I'm by no way the finished article when it comes to covering MMA. I have a long, long, long way to go. And I look to try and improve every day. But, I mean, I'm definitely with the right people, and they're definitely with Severe MMA. The guys there, they've been a savage help to me, and they're guiding me in the right direction.
So I know you said Severe MMA and like everything that's going on now, but the early 2000s was still technically the dark days of MMA. How do you jump into the kind of MMA media from having a fight, having a few fights, not kind of kicking that, and then what's the jump? Because there's no career path. There's no, oh, I just follow what this person's done in the past.
It's not an obvious career path now, let alone
Yeah,
then.
No, there isn't. And I mean, when you're talking about mixed martial arts journalism or media in particular, like, I mean, not in my eyes, but in many people's eyes, it's like lower on the totem pole in comparison to other sports. Like, so your opportunities for guys who are really good at doing it might not be the same as if you went and jumped in to maybe cover soccer or whatever you want to say.
Soccer. You've been living in Canada
for
too
me,
long.
yeah, I know. I have to get. Well, we call it soccer in Ireland too. So I mean, because we do have Gaelic foot, we do have a Gaelic,
Oh, yeah,
we have a
it's
Gaelic
true.
football. So look, it wasn't too big of an adjustment over here. They call it soccer here too. But like this, for me, it was more so my same thought process before I went and started fighting was my same thought process before I started covering MMA. Was like, okay, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm going to be any good at it. But I'm going to have to give it a go, because I'm not going to fucking sit back for the rest of my life and wonder what if. Because like I much prefer go and give something a go, and then for it not to work out rather than not to try anything at all. So I mean, I moved country and other things got in the way and everything like that. But when the time was right for me to do it, that's the time I made the jump, because I didn't want to go in and half-ass it and not fully commit to it. I feel that I'm in a position right now where I can fully commit to it. And also, like, I'm doing all of this MMA work at the same time as doing a regular job as well. Like, I mean, it's not it's a full-time job, but it's not my full-time job. I have another source of income. So, I mean, I'm putting in some fucking big hours during the week now. You know what I mean? I'm doing my normal day job, and then you're coming in and doing mixed martial arts. But I mean, when I'm doing my mixed martial arts work, it honestly doesn't feel like work. It's like I get tremendous pleasure out of doing it and writing previews, and the whole art of breaking down fighter A versus fighter B is just so fascinating for me. And it's like, you know, I may not always be right with my predictions, but I can guarantee you one thing: if I do give a prediction, I'll have a valid excuse of why I think a certain fight is going to go that way. And you know, mixed martial arts is it's so unpredictable that sometimes it can make you out to be the biggest genius in the world, and sometimes it can make you out to be the biggest fool in the world. So that's just things you have to deal with.
But if there's one guarantee from our podcasts with Harry, is you'll always give your predictions a bit prematurely as well.
I sure do.
You're always keen to get there.
I'm always keen to get there. Yeah, definitely. I'm trying to get better, and he's picking up my bad habits now. But it's nice that he's not here to give out to us for all of that kind of stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, shout out to Harry. You inspire fear every time I say something that I'm not even kind of sure about. Fucking the way that Alex got crucified for not knowing who was it? Rob Font, and they just got absolutely crucified for it. So yes, Harry, you inspire fear.
That's it. He's a legend.
But so what is it that you mostly like about so you mentioned kind of two different aspects there. One was around the interviews and telling fighter stories, and one was on the more technical side about the breakdowns, which obviously is partly a service to fighters, but I always feel that breakdowns are more of a service to fans. It's about developing their understanding, about growing the sport. I mean, obviously both feed back to MMA, but is there an aspect that you prefer?
I do really love breaking down fights. I mean, when I talk about breaking down fights and I look back on tape and take notes, I just think that the whole, you know, pitching two guys' skills against one another, what they could do to each other, what they can do to defend each other, I just think all of that kind of thing is really fascinating for me, like human chess, real problem solving. Um, I really love doing that. Like, I mean, that me breaking down fights is what really gets my juices flowing. But also, I get like great sense. Like, I really enjoy listening to somebody, like, and genuinely, like, we have people on where managers would reach out and stuff like that, and I have to pick and choose who. And I don't mean that there's a bunch of people like looking to get interviews with me, but you might have a couple. I only have a certain amount of time in the week, so I'll always, being Irish, I'll always lean towards maybe giving the Irish fighters the platform. But um, I mean, I do enjoy telling people stories. I had somebody on, Serena De Jesus, who's an Invicta fighter. She was the first diagnosed autistic fighter in professional mixed martial arts history. So, her story was fascinating, and the amount of hurdles that she's had to overcome to get to even step into the cage, being a person with autism and all the sensory things that people with autism have to deal with. But I would have never got a chance to talk to somebody like that if I didn't make the jump to cover mixed martial arts or joined up with Severe MMA. I mean, that's what I enjoy. It's telling those people's stories and getting them to express their personalities when you're doing a fighter interview, so that like they're not looked at as this like barbaric fighter that just wants bloodlust and wants to beat people up. No, there's actually some pretty nice, really good people in the sport of mixed martial arts, and they have great stories. So, I mean, I'm excited to talk to them, to find out those stories for myself. Number one, I'm excited, and I also get excited to share the stories with everybody else as well.
I know what you mean. I mean, I think there's a this big idea that MMA fighters are all thugs, and I think that everyone who trains knows that they're not, but it's still a very small proportion of the population who actually train MMA or train like a real combat sport like Muay Thai, and not just having done like a bit of karate when you're 7. There's still, like, it's just such a small proportion of the population, but for any of us who train, it's very obvious that there are some at least fairly smart people who are like hitting each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's like, it's the same as anything like that. There's smart people that are good at certain jobs as well, and there's not so smart people that are good at maybe the same job as well. I don't know. I worded that really wrong. I made a hash of that, but I mean,
MMA fighters are people like everyone else.
Exactly. But they are a different breed because they have that little.
Oh yeah.
They have that little piece of them that just loves to throw themselves into a little bit of chaos or something like that. But I mean, that was a misconception way back in the day that they're all thugs and everything like that. There's fighters out there now with college degrees and university degrees, and there's some very intelligent people in the sport as well. So, I mean, but
yeah, Robbie's had a few fights, and he's got quite
define intelligence, though. I mean, intelligence can mean one thing for one person and another for another, really, can't it? I mean, you can be an intelligent fighter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You could have better fight IQ than somebody else, which would make you more intelligent. So, I mean, I don't think intelligence really boils down to it. It boils down to what you're passionate about, and I think a lot of these fighters are passionate about fighting and competing and getting themselves out there.
I think as well with fighting, you get a lot of outliers as well. And it can be good, it can be bad, but understanding who those outliers are in the sport, it's a good story to tell. Like even with us doing the interviews, and we don't just focus on MMA. We've interviewed Muay Thai, BJJ, we've interviewed a Commonwealth wrestler, and they all have kind of quirks, I think is probably the politest way to say it. But it's fascinating to kind of dig that up and open up that question set and be like, what makes you tick? Like, why do you do this? And I think as we've all trained and we've all competed, we've had our toes in the water, and it's kind of like, what makes these people go to that next level? And that's where it's really interesting. I think the analysis side, the MMA analytics and being like a sports analyst, Robbie said that was like to get people in. I think that's more for like us. I like to read work like your work about like breaking down fights to kind of get your opinion. I respect your opinion, so I want to know what you're thinking. I think to engage the wider public and like make MMA's stereotypes disappear, I think the stories are the best way.
Yeah, and it's for me when I'm trying to break down some fights is like, you know, it's a fine line on getting maybe super technical that some of the information might go over some people's heads, and maybe not so more with the hardcores, but it's the fine line that I have to try and say, like, how detailed do I want to get about a fight, rather than like, I mean, when I first started writing previews, I was writing maybe 4,000 or 5,000 words, and I was like spending hours doing it, and I was like, okay, I need to kind of use my time a little bit better. And I simply was over breaking down fights. I was breaking down everything. Whereas that you might lose the imagination of some people reading that, and they're like, oh my God, I don't understand what he's saying, or you might get lost in some of the breakdowns. So now I've kind of got a little bit better of maybe kind of buttoning down what I want to say and kind of saying it in shorter term points and shorter sentences, and kind of simplifying it the best I can. And I think it's important to do that when you're writing, and you can open up maybe a little bit more when we're recording a podcast. So it's like, if we're talking about the balance breakdown, is probably the right time when you can kind of speak a certain way, and you can get the words and the analytics side of it out a lot quicker than you can when you're writing.
It's much easier to consume.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
People's
for sure.
attention span
Well, I
is
think
less
the writing
than-
is important. I mean, the writing side of the thing for me is important as well. You know, I've been covering every UFC event since November 2019. Every single event, I've wrote a preview for it, and I've done results on it as well. That for me has kind of integrated me into the UFC. It when I looked at all the events anyway before I started covering it, but now that I am covering it, I'm physically writing down these previews, and I'm physically writing down how these fighters have got on and what's good about them and what's bad about them, and that's only going to benefit me down the line, because I'm going to continue in doing that. I'm on a good run right now, and I want to keep that run going with UFCs. And I did try to do it with Bellators and other events, but the timing of it, I kind of wanted to spend more time on other things. But the UFC previews for me on Severe MMA will always be a staple. And luckily enough, we have Harry that's come in, and a few other guys at Severe MMA that can help us out in other areas, which kind of frees me up to do interviews as well. But I really do enjoy it, and I really do get a lot out of writing those previews. And you know, you pick up little snippets of information that yourself that's really is handy. Like, as back in the day, I was really good for remembering fights. Like, I mean, somebody could tell me, name an event and name a fight, and I'd tell you how the fight was finished, what round it was finished in, and all of that. Like, I was really good at doing that. But there's so many fights going on right now. It's so hard to keep up with. So, I mean, for me, it's important to physically write out or preview. I do previews, or I do something else called 5 for Fighting, where I might just pick 5 fights that happen over a weekend and just break down those 5 fights. And those are fights that I'm interested in as well. So it's like, these are the fights that I'm interested in. I want to break them down and share them with everybody. But like that kind of thing as well, looking in, studying tape. I mean, the actual process of writing a preview isn't just sitting down and writing what comes to your head, or checking topology. I mean, if you really want to give a good account of yourself, you got to look at these fights and look at what positives and negatives both fighters bring to the table, and how they can use those against one another. And you're studying tape for hours, for a couple of hours before you do some previews at times as well. But yeah, it's like, the previews will stand to me, and I'm going to continue writing them for as long as I can. I think it's important, along with the interviews. There's some media members that maybe just don't want to write, or don't have the time to write, that want to jump into interviewing straight away, and good for them. For me, I wanted to kind of hone my writing skills, and like, I'm never going to I'm never going to be one of these writers that are like is excellent, but I will always be looking to improve my writing. And I think if you looked at my previews from the very start or my articles from the very start in comparison to now, you will have seen a big improvement. So, you know, I'm putting myself out there, and at the same time, I'm growing as a kind of a person who's covering the sport as well, and I'm trying to get better. So, you know what I mean? I have to take the positive feedback and the negative feedback, and the positive or the negative feedback doesn't affect me either way. It's just I'm going to stay doing what I'm doing, and I'm honest with myself and humble enough to know that, you know, I there are areas that I need to improve in as well. So that's it. I'll get there eventually. And I think that if you're not, as a person in life, if you're not always looking to slightly improve yourself, no matter whether it's you're looking at yourself as a person or in the field that you're in, I think it's a good thing to always be kind of looking and look forward and looking to try and improve yourself.
Yeah. You go on these long bits. There's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, sorry, I go off on rant. Sorry, guys.
One bit I was interested to ask about, because you mentioned about shortening up your articles, making them more compact. One thing that I think MMA media probably in general struggles with, and it's been an issue I've struggled with every time. Well, both times I've written for magazines is. Obviously, you want to create engaging content that people are going to listen to, and it's actually cropped up to a lesser extent of our podcasts in that sometimes we'll interview people and it'll go on, and some of the early ones we did for like 2 hours, 3 hours, and people don't even start them. People don't even start them because they're a fucking mammoth thing it's just intimidating. So we started, you know, we actively cut them down. But the funny thing is that afterwards we'll carry on chatting. I'll be like, this could still go on the fucking podcast, but I don't think anyone's going to listen to it if we actually put it all on there. One thing I think people struggle with is the idea between creating the content that you want, that you think is sort of important to do, the interviews, the writing, or whatever, and then impacting like the quality of your product to make it engaging. Because you can make something amazing, you make an absolute masterpiece, but if you spend 10 hours on it and no one fucking reads it or watches it, it can be really demoralizing.
Yeah, and that kind of would have happened to me, but I didn't really find it demoralizing. It was more like getting more experience and using my time a lot better, as in when I was probably writing previews that I should have been writing when I had like a bunch of followers or a bunch of people reading it. But the reality was I was writing my first ever UFC preview and probably nobody was reading it, or very minimum amount of people were reading it, because I haven't been putting myself out that much when I started. But now I've been doing it for 2 years. I've been constant with the previews and stuff like that. So, I mean, you have to think of the people. I think in general, people their patience has dwindled a lot in time, whereas that people don't, like you said, Robbie, people will look at a 2 hour long podcast and go, oh, fuck, I don't have time for that. I don't know whether people would want to sit down and read 4 or 5 or 6,000 words on a UFC fucking fight night card that's in the Apex either. So, I mean, those are the things that I had to kind of learn and figure out along the way. And what I still want to educate, and I still want to provide enough analysis. What I've been told, and the advice that I've been given, is just say what you want to say in less words. And that's what I've had to learn to do. And I've made that adjustment now, and I'm kind of just going with that for right now. And I'm very happy with the previews that I'm doing and stuff like that too.
Because there's been a societal shift in a sense of you're competing with Twitter. And you don't have pages and pages. People don't read broadsheet newspapers anymore. You're competing with
No, not
Twitter.
at all. You're
So
competing
I
with
think
Twitter. You're competing with Snapchat that only has 10-second videos. You're competing with like TikTok, who has short videos. The Instagram Reels is only 1 minute long. You know, all content has been cut down in general, and I think as a result, people's like concentration and willingness, like the introduction of social media and phones into people's lives as well, has also dwindled their concentration. Like, try sit down and watch a movie or TV show without picking up your phone and looking at it right now. It's
You know what? I wonder about this. People are quite critical nowadays, people's attention spans. I kind of wonder if it's more to do with the fact that it's so much more available, because suddenly we can just make content. I can make content in about 10 seconds and put it up, right? There's suddenly a massive competition for attention.
Robbie's TikTok coming soon.
Well, back in the day, when broadsheet newspapers were your only source of information and you could only pick between 6 things, obviously you're going to spend time to read it. That's a sixth of all the news you can get. You're going to fucking read the whole thing. Because people still listen to Joe Rogan's interviews, which are 2 or 4 hours long, and people still read long articles. I think part of the trouble is that it's for people like us at the moment who aren't very well known. I can't go up to a stranger in the street and be like, hey, do you want to watch or listen to my podcast? It's going to be 2.5 hours. They'll be like, no, fuck off. Like,
I think you can't really get in. Like, for me, and I honestly would say this, and I appreciate anyone who looks and reads at my stuff as well. But honestly, if I was to continue doing what I was doing for the rest of my life and to stay in the position that I'm in right now, or if very minimal people read it, it wouldn't matter. I'm still going to stay doing it because I get a great sense of feeling out of it for myself. And for so long before doing it, you're worried about, and in general, people worry about what other people think. And I think that's not the way to go. Just do what you want to do for yourself and just stay doing it. And don't worry about what's coming in. Like, you know, you could get caught up with praise as much as you can get caught up with some negativity or constructive criticism. You know, even with my interviews, like some of my interviews in early stages, I would have been guilty of stepping on people and talking over people. And, you know, the art of a good interview is not saying anything at all. Just asking the right question and letting the person you're being interviewed, let them say what they have to say. And, you know, I was guilty of that. You know, I like to talk, you know, I rant, I go off, you know, but that mainly boiled down to me probably being excited, being in a position where I'm sitting down talking to another fighter where I never thought I would be. But that will kind of dwindle away, and you'll notice with my more recent interviews that maybe I'm a lot more quieter. But like, I mean, you need those kind of experiences and you need that kind of constructive criticism in order to get better. Like I say to Sean or Graham or anyone like that, if there's something that I need to be doing differently, tell me and I'll do it. Yeah. No problem. I trust those guys and I trust their opinion and I value their opinion an awful amount. So, you know, they're understanding from my point of view as well. So, I mean, that's it. Like, just, I don't care if anybody listens. I appreciate it. I appreciate anyone who listens to my stuff or reads my stuff or listens to podcasts. I really do appreciate it. But it's
you don't care about the ones you don't.
Yeah, I don't.
You just care about the ones you do.
Yeah, and I care about the ones that I do. But I mean, it's not going to affect my mindset if 10 people read it or 100 people read it. I'm getting the work out there for myself.
I think that's why. Do you ever hear about how like most podcasts get to like 5 episodes and then just keel over? Mm-hmm. I feel like that might be because a lot of people go into it being like, this seems fun to do. I'm going to make a living out of this, or this is going to be me from now on. They're not going into it being, I want to talk to people for 2 hours, which is most of the reason behind our podcast. And it's probably why we're on episode 50 something. And still we've got like,
that's a great achievement.
Regular listeners.
Yeah, that's a great achievement. Like, I mean, it's a great thing, and like, stay doing it. Like, I mean, you do some great interviews, and you're passionate about the sport, and you obviously enjoy sitting down and talking to people too. So, I mean, good for you guys, and definitely keep it up as well.
That's the thing, isn't it? Like, I've spent an hour tonight doing something I wouldn't normally do. I've had a good. I know you quite well now, Ian, but I have chats with people I don't know, and I learn weird shit about people. I'm not bothered about getting a sponsorship from Manscaped and things like that. Like,
Okay, so some people will have different motivations for doing certain things. My motivation to get in and start covering the sport of mixed martial arts was not based off anything financial. It was based off pure love and raw passion for the sport and wanting to give back and wanting to share that passion. And I mean, I'm doing that right now, and it's just a bonus if people want to come along for the ride
it's
as well.
funny,
That's
isn't
the
it?
way I
Because
look at.
your media career follows very similar to your fighting career. You join a gym. It's not to get rich and famous. It's to, I've seen this on the TV and I want to have a go at it. Same with, you just want to put content out because you enjoy the experience of doing it. You're saying about
Exactly,
your
and you know,
interviews. It's
I
drilling,
do
isn't
have
it?
that. Yeah, I do have the benefit too of having that past it fight experience as well, which kind of gives me a different look at some certain fights, and it gives me a mindset of sometimes what these guys are going through and what these women are going through as well. When they're preparing and when they're going into a cage, you know, I can kind of in some ways relate on a smaller level, but I also have that respect for anybody who does it too, because I've got a taste of that experience for myself. And I mean, it's not to be snuffed at. I mean, you're talking about two women locking themselves into a cage and beating the shit out of one another until there's an eventual winner. I mean, it's daunting to say that in a way, but it's beautiful in another sense of the word. I mean, they're putting so much on the line for our entertainment, for the fans' entertainment. They're fighting for their families. There's so many great things about the sport of MMA, and you know, it's probably not talked about enough. We talk about how brutal it is and how bloody it is, and we talk about all the domestic violence charges and all the shit talk on Twitter and everything like that. But realistically, in the bones of it and the nuts and bolts of the sport, it's a fucking beautiful sport. It's a beautiful community, and there's some great people involved in it, as well as there's some not so great people involved in it too. But that's going to come with anything.
You know what? MMA people are just people all the same. About half of them pretty shit, just like everyone else.
It's not wrong.
But I think it's an interesting bit now that, I mean, obviously we've had a bit of traction and you have kept it up because we're all getting into it because we love it. But wouldn't you want this to be your main career? Wouldn't you want this to be like the main thing you do week in, week out?
Yeah, but I guess doing anything that you enjoy doing and getting paid for it is probably a good thing. Like, so I'd be lying if I said that. I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't enjoy it. But I mean, it's not the reason that I'm in. If those opportunities come in down the line, then so be it. We'll see. But like, I'm very happy with my situation right now. I kind of looking at it as a mindset of I'm treating my entry into kind of mixed martial arts media as a kind of an apprenticeship as such over maybe 4 years. So I'm about 2 years into 4 years. So I'm not even during that first 4 years, me is just working on the craft, trying to better myself as a media member, as an interviewer, as a writer. And then when we get to that 4 year mark, that's the time when I'll think of like maybe what's next or what we'll see where we're at then. I don't want to think too far ahead. I mean, that's it. I've a lot of work to do. I'm going to stay working as well and stay putting out that content and stay recording podcasts and doing this. Is like none of this shit is handed to anybody. Like anybody who has ever been successful at that has had to work like a dog, and you know no success or nothing is ever handed to anybody in life. I mean, you have to go out there and take the bull by the horn sometimes and put the work in, and I'm more than prepared to do that. And I mean, my motivations honestly do not lie around money right now. It's just wanting to be a person who can cover the sport and who can do a good job and do it correctly. That's my goal right now as a media member.
Nice. Okay. I don't really know where to go from there. Like, Yeah, I mean, I guess you're motivated by. I guess it's not so much that money is what I'm wondering if it motivates you. Well, yeah, obviously, I don't think the money is clearly the motivation for this.
Hmm.
What I kind of wonder is there an end goal to it? Is there that you'd want to be the next more likable version of Ariel Hawani, or would you be content to continue with a day job forever and have this on the side, because you're putting in a lot of work for a man
Yeah.
who's just going to carry on doing this on and on and on?
Right now in my life, it's very feasible. Right now,
Yeah.
it is a lot of work, right? I don't really want to get caught up too much in what will happen down the line. I don't want to be the next Ariel Helwani. I just want to be Ian O'Neill, and I want to stay being Ian O'Neill, and that's it. If the end goal for me, maybe at a certain time going and covering events live and stuff like that, a couple of the big events, but I have a lot of work to do before I get to that stage as well. And that's what the plan is, really. You have to set small time achievable goals. And
Mhm.
I mean, any goals that I have set for myself so far, I've absolutely blasted through them. Like, I mean, I set myself a goal maybe to record a handful of podcasts last year and this year, but I've already broke down a lot of those barriers. I didn't think I would be interviewing fighters this quickly either, if I'm being honest, but luckily enough, I've been given the opportunity. And the goal for me is just to improve right now and to learn. Like, I've had the pleasure of experiencing the sport of mixed martial arts as a fan. I've had the pleasure of experiencing it as a fighter, and now I'm having the experience of covering the sport and from this side of things, and all of them are different. And I'm currently learning the tricks of the trade, if you want to say, when it comes to covering media. And for me, that's what the ultimate goal for me is right now, is just to stay improving, stay banging out the content, just working hard. I like being busy. Doing the MMA work doesn't feel like work to me, to be honest. I just really enjoy any time I'm talking about the sport. If I'm not talking about it, if I'm not writing about it, I'm thinking about it. You know what I mean? It's just a big part of my life, and I'm glad that I actually have a platform that I can share the passion with everybody.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please consider subscribing to the podcast and checking us out on YouTube, Facebook and Instagram under the name Combat Thoughts. We'll see you next time.